Eleanor, I didn't know who else to call. Those were the first real words my daughter-in-law ever spoke to me, not at our first meeting, not at her wedding, not when my grandson was born. But in a hospital emergency room, with her child fighting to breathe and mascara streaking down her rain-soaked face. For 3 years, she had kept me at a distance so carefully constructed I had accepted I would never truly know my own grandson. Until the night everything changed. This is the story of what happens when the walls we build to protect ourselves become the very prisons we need to escape from. What I couldn't say. My name is Eleanor Price, and I've spent the better part of my life believing that understanding people was something you could learn, like conjugating verbs or identifying themes in literature. I taught high school English for 35 years, which meant I read countless essays about fractured families, about the silent wars that happen around dinner tables, about the particular kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who are supposed to love you. I graded papers about mothers and daughters who couldn't speak the same language, about fathers who disappeared into their work, about siblings who became strangers. I thought I understood the anatomy of family dysfunction. I thought I had developed a kind of immunity to it, the way doctors become desensitized to the sight of blood. I was wrong. Because nothing, not decades of reading confessional teenage poetry, not years of mediating parent-teacher conferences, not even my own complicated relationship with my mother-in-law prepared me for the particular brand of exclusion that came with having a daughter-in-law who didn't want me in her life. Her name is Lena, and from the very first moment I met her, I understood that she operated according to a set of rules I had never been given access to. She wasn't unkind. That would have been easier to process, actually. Unkindness has shape and texture. You can point to it and say, there, that hurt, and here's why. But Lena's distance was more sophisticated than that. It was architectural, carefully designed. Every interaction felt like it had been blueprinted in advance, with clear boundaries about how close I was allowed to get before I encountered a wall. The first time Mark brought her to my house, I remember watching the way she moved through my living room slowly, deliberately, as though she were cataloging everything for some future reference. She didn't touch anything, didn't pick up the framed photos on the mantle or run her fingers along the spines of books, the way most people do when they're trying to understand someone through their belongings. She simply observed, keeping her hands folded in front of her, like she was touring a museum. When I offered her tea, she smiled, and that smile was perfect, I'll give her that. It hit all the right notes. Warm enough to seem genuine, brief enough to maintain distance. That's very kind of you, Eleanor, she said. And I noticed immediately that she didn't call me Mrs. Price, or Mark's mom, or anything that would have suggested I held a specific role in her life. Just Eleanor, as though we were colleagues, acquaintances, people who happened to be in the same room by coincidence, rather than by the intricate design of family. Mark stood between us, his hand resting on the small of her back, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he was bracing himself for something. Even then, I think he knew that his mother and his future wife would never find each other the way he hoped we would. He was already preparing to be the translator, the mediator, the person who would spend years trying to build bridges between two women who spoke entirely different languages. The wedding came 6 months later, and it was lovely in that minimalist, carefully curated way that weddings are, when they've been planned by people who value aesthetics over sentimentality. There were white roses and soft candlelight and a string quartet, playing something classical and vaguely melancholy. Lena wore a dress that looked like it had been designed specifically for her body. Simple and elegant and absolutely perfect. I sat in the third row, not the first, because apparently the first row was reserved for Lena's parents and her younger sister, who served as maid of honor. Mark's best man was someone I'd never met, a college friend I didn't know he'd stayed close to. I learned about him the same way I learned about everything else that day, by watching from a distance. The invitation had arrived in the mail weeks earlier, printed on thick cream-colored cardstock with elegant typography. It was beautiful, the kind of invitation that gets featured in wedding magazines. I ran my fingers over the embossed letters and felt a strange hollowness in my chest. Because this invitation, this formal piece of paper, was Apparently how I was supposed to learn the details of my only son's wedding. I hadn't been consulted about the date. I hadn't been asked about the venue. I hadn't been invited to any dress shopping or cake tasting or any of the small rituals that mothers and daughters-in-law sometimes share when they're building something together. I was a guest. That was all. During the reception, I found myself standing alone near a table, covered in artfully arranged hors d'oeuvres, holding a glass of champagne. I didn't particularly want watching my son dance with his new wife. They looked happy, genuinely, radiantly happy, and I was glad for that. Truly. But I also felt the weight of my own irrelevance pressing down on me like a physical thing. I approached Lena once during the evening, catching her during a brief moment when she wasn't surrounded by her friends. She was standing by one of the tall windows, looking out at the garden, where white lights had been strung through the trees. "You look absolutely beautiful," I told her, and I meant it. She turned, and for just a fraction of a second, I saw something flicker across her face, surprise, maybe, or discomfort. But then the polite smile returned, perfectly calibrated. "Thank you, Eleanor. That's very sweet." I stood there, trying to think of what else to say, trying to find some thread I could pull that might unravel the careful distance she kept between us. But before I could speak, one of her bridesmaids appeared, linking arms with Lena and pulling her away with laughter and champagne. And the kind of easy intimacy I knew I would never have with her. I went home that night and sat in my kitchen until almost 3 in the morning, drinking tea and trying to understand why. I felt like I'd just attended a stranger's wedding. The phone call came 3 weeks after they returned from their honeymoon. Mark's voice had that overly careful quality it gets when he's about to deliver news he knows I won't want to hear. "Mom, can we talk about something?" My stomach tightened. Of course. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, exactly. It's just, Lena and I have been talking about boundaries. That word, boundaries, it's become such a buzzword these days, hasn't it? Everyone talks about boundaries like they're these sacred lines we're all supposed to respect without question. And I do believe in boundaries, I do. But there's something particularly cruel about being told you need to respect boundaries when you didn't even know you'd been crossing them in the first place. "What kind of boundaries?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral even though my heart was hammering. Mark exhaled, and I could picture him exactly sitting on the edge of his couch, probably rubbing his forehead the way he does when he's stressed. "Lena needs advance notice before we have visitors. She's not comfortable with people dropping by unannounced." "I've never dropped by unannounced," I said, trying not to sound defensive. "I know, Mom. I know you haven't. But she wants to make sure we're all on the same page going forward. So if you want to visit, maybe just text first? Give us a few days' notice so we can plan?" I thought about all the times Mark had shown up at my door unannounced over the years. When he was in college and needed to do laundry. When he got his first apartment and realized he didn't know how to cook anything. When he'd had a bad day and just wanted to sit in the kitchen where he grew up and eat leftover lasagna. I had never once asked him for advance notice. My door had always been open. But apparently, his door was not. "Of course," I said, because what else could I say? "Whatever makes Lena comfortable." "Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd understand." But I didn't understand. Not really. I understood the words, but I didn't understand the why beneath them. What had I done to make Lena feel like I was someone who needed to be kept at arm's length? What had I failed to do that might have made her feel like I was safe? I spent the next 6 months walking on eggshells made of good intentions. I sent texts before I did anything. "Would it be okay if I dropped off those books? Mark mentioned, is this a good week for lunch? I made too much soup, would you like some, or should I freeze it?" Lena's responses were always prompt and always polite. "That's very thoughtful, but we're actually swamped this week. We're trying to eat lighter right now, but thank you. Let's plan something for next month?" Next month never came. I brought gifts to their apartment when I was invited, carefully chosen things I thought they might need or enjoy. A set of nice kitchen knives because I'd noticed theirs were dull. A framed print I'd found at an art fair that reminded me of a trip Mark had told me about. A book of poems I thought Lena might like based on something Mark had mentioned in passing about her taste in literature. Lena accepted everything with the same practiced gratitude. "Oh, Eleanor, you didn't have to do this. which, I was learning, was just a polite way of saying she wished I hadn't. The gifts would appear on a shelf or a side table, still in their wrapping, untouched. Like museum pieces, like evidence of an obligation she wished she could avoid. I stopped bringing things after a while. It was too painful to see them sitting there, these small offerings of connection, collecting dust. Then came the announcement that changed everything, or at least, I hoped it would. Mark called one evening, his voice trembling with excitement and nervousness. "Mom, Lena's pregnant." I felt something crack open in my chest, some long dormant hope that maybe this would change things. Maybe a baby would soften the edges between us. Maybe becoming a grandmother would give me a role that Lena couldn't quite architect away. "We're not telling people yet," Mark added quickly. "We want to wait until the second trimester. But I wanted you to know." I held onto that secret like a talisman. My son had trusted me with something before the rest of the world knew. That had to mean something, didn't it? I knitted a blanket over the next few months, pale yellow, gender neutral, every stitch infused with the kind of love I didn't know how else to express. I imagined wrapping my grandchild in it, imagined the weight of a baby in my arms, imagined finally having a connection to this family I'd been locked out of. I allowed myself to hope, even though hope had become a dangerous thing to hold onto where Lena was concerned. The day Jamie was born, I waited 12 hours before I got the call inviting me to the hospital. 12 hours. I later learned that Lena's entire family had been there within 2 hours of the birth. Her mother had been in the delivery room. Her sister had brought balloons and flowers. Her father had taken enough photos to fill 3 albums. I arrived to find them all still there, crowded around the hospital bed, passing the baby between them with the easy familiarity of people who belonged. Mark saw me first and crossed the room quickly, pulling me into a hug. "Mom, I'm sorry. It's been chaos. Come meet your grandson." Lena was sitting up in bed, looking exhausted in that particular way. New mothers look like they've just performed an act of magic they're not quite sure they survived. She glanced up when Mark said my name, and I saw her body tense, just slightly. A barely perceptible shift that I doubt anyone else noticed. But I noticed. I always noticed. "Eleanor," she said, managing a tired smile. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming." As though I'd had a choice. As though I might have decided that meeting my first grandchild wasn't important enough to warrant the drive. I approached the bed slowly, carefully, like I was approaching a wild animal that might bolt. "He's beautiful," I said, looking down at the tiny bundle in her arms. "What's his name?" "Jamie," Mark said, pride saturating his voice. "Jamie Michael Price." Michael, my father's name. I felt tears sting my eyes, grateful for even that small inclusion. "Would you like to hold him?" I asked, directing the question to Lena because I'd learned by now that nothing happened in this family without her permission. She looked at Mark, then back at me. Then, after a pause that felt like an eternity, she nodded and carefully transferred Jamie into my arms. He was so small, so impossibly perfect. I looked down at his tiny fingers, his closed eyes, the way his mouth moved even in sleep, and I felt a love so fierce it was almost violent. This was my grandson, my family, my blood, but I was holding him in borrowed time, and I knew it. After exactly 3 minutes, I know because I was watching the clock on the wall, trying to memorize every second Lena reached out. "I should probably feed him soon," she said, her voice gentle but firm. I handed him back, feeling the weight of his absence immediately. Over the next 3 years, I saw Jamie exactly 8 times. 8 times in 3 years. I kept count because what else could I do? I sent gifts for every milestone: his first birthday, his second, his third. I sent books and toys and clothes that I carefully selected based on whatever scraps of information Mark let slip about Jamie's interests. Sometimes Mark would send me a photo Jamie playing with the toy truck. I'd sent Jamie wearing the sweater I'd knitted, Jamie reading one of the books I'd picked out. The photos were sweet, but they also felt like consolation prizes. Like evidence that I existed in this child's life, even if only as a name attached to packages that arrived in the mail. I suggested visits. Maybe I could come by on Saturday? Would Jamie like to spend an afternoon at the park? I'd love to take him to the Children's Museum. The answer was always some version of no, dressed up in excuses that were probably legitimate but felt like rejections nonetheless. "He's not feeling well. We have plans. Lena's been overwhelmed with work." Maybe next month. I learned to stop asking. The truth I didn't want to admit to myself was that Jamie was growing up without knowing me. To him, I was probably just a name his parents mentioned occasionally. That's from Grandma Eleanor. A ghost. A concept rather than a person. And Lena wanted it that way. I didn't understand why, but I'd stopped trying to. Some people just don't want you in their lives, and no amount of effort or good intentions will change that. All you can do is step back and try not to internalize the rejection, even though it burrows into you like a splinter you can't quite reach. I thought about confronting Mark. I drafted texts I never sent. Why won't she let me see my grandson? What did I do to deserve this? Don't I get a say in this? But I never sent them because I knew what would happen. Mark would get defensive. He'd make excuses for Lena. He'd accuse me of not respecting boundaries. And in the end, I'd still be on the outside, only now there would be resentment between us two. So I stayed silent and told myself it was dignity. But really, it was just defeat. I spent 3 years being a grandmother to a child I barely knew. 3 years sending love into a void and hoping some small part of it reached him. 3 years wondering what I had done wrong, replaying every interaction with Lena in my mind. Searching for the moment I'd crossed some invisible line that had gotten me permanently exiled from their lives. And then, on a rainy Thursday night in October, everything changed. The call came at 8:47 p.m. I was in my kitchen, preparing a cup of chamomile tea and listening to the rain drum against the windows. With that insistent rhythm, rain has when it's not planning to stop anytime soon. My phone lit up on the counter, a number I didn't recognize, which usually meant spam. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. Is this Eleanor Price? The voice was female, professional, urgent without being panicked. The kind of voice that delivers bad news for a living. Yes, this is she. Mrs. Price, this is Amanda Chen from St. Alden's Medical Center. I'm calling because your grandson, Jamie Price, has been brought to our emergency department with severe respiratory distress. His mother listed you as the primary emergency contact. How quickly can you get here? The world tilted. Everything in my kitchen, the teacup, the countertop, the chair I'd been about to sit in seemed to shift sideways as my brain struggled to process what I'd just heard. Is he stable? He's being treated right now. The attending physician can give you more information when you arrive. The mother is en route, but she specifically requested that we notify you immediately. She requested me. Lena requested me. I don't remember grabbing my coat or my keys or locking the door behind me. I don't remember the drive except in fragments, the rain hammering my windshield, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel, the way every red light felt like a personal attack, the voice in my head chanting, "Please, please, please," like a prayer I'd forgotten I knew how to say. All I could think about was Jamie, sweet Jamie, who I barely knew but loved with an intensity that surprised me, struggling to breathe. Fighting for air, scared and small and needing his grandmother, who had been kept carefully at arm's length for 3 years. The emergency room was bright and cold and smelled like antiseptic and fear. I rushed to the reception desk, barely able to get Jamie's name out, being directed to the pediatric waiting area. My heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. And there she was, Lena, sitting in one of those terrible plastic chairs they have in hospitals, her clothes soaked through from the rain. Her hair plastered to her face, mascara streaked down her cheeks in dark rivers. She looked like she'd been crying for hours. She looked like she'd been drowning. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, and the expression on her face was something I'd never seen before. The walls were gone, not lowered, not temporarily suspended, gone, completely demolished. She looked at me like I was the only person in the world who could help her, and in that moment, I understood that this crisis, this terrible, frightening moment was the first time Lena had ever truly needed me. "Eleanor," she said, and her voice cracked like something breaking. I crossed the room and wrapped my arms around her without hesitation, without asking permission, without worrying about boundaries or advance notice or any of the careful architecture we'd built between us over the years. And she collapsed into me. She actually collapsed, her entire body going slack against mine like she'd been holding herself up through sheer force of will and had finally given out. She sobbed into my shoulder, huge, gasping sobs that shook both of us, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and primal and terrified. He couldn't breathe. I called 911, but I didn't know Mark's not here, and I didn't know who else. Shish, I said, holding her tighter, one hand stroking her wet hair. I'm here, Lena. You're not alone. Tell me what happened. She pulled back just enough to look at me, her eyes red and swollen and filled with terror. We were playing in the living room. He was fine, completely fine. And then suddenly he started coughing and he couldn't catch his breath and his lips started turning blue and her voice broke again. God, Eleanor, I thought I was going to watch my son die. But you didn't, I said firmly, gripping her shoulders. You called for help. You got him here. You did everything right. Do you hear me? You saved him. I was so scared. Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm still so scared. I know. Me too. But we're going to get through this together, okay? Whatever happens, you're not alone. I'm right here with you. She nodded, tears still streaming down her face, and then she did something that stunned me. She reached for my hand and held it tight, like she was drowning. And I was the only thing keeping her tethered to solid ground. We sat like that for what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes before a doctor finally emerged, a young woman with kind eyes and exhaustion etched into every line of her face. Mrs. Price? She said, looking between us. I'm his mother, Lena said, standing on shaky legs. This is his grandmother. The doctor nodded. Jamie is stable. It was a severe asthma attack triggered by what we believe was an allergic reaction to something in your home, possibly dust mites or pet dander. We've administered medication to open his airways and he's breathing much better now. We'd like to keep him overnight for observation, but I can tell you with confidence that he's going to be fine. The relief was so powerful I thought my legs might give out. I felt Lena sag beside me, and I wrapped my arm around her waist to steady her. Can I see him? Lena asked, her voice trembling. Of course. Come with me. The doctor led us through a maze of corridors to the pediatric ward, where Jamie was lying in a bed that looked far too big for his small body. Oxygen tubes in his nose, monitors beeping softly beside him. His eyes were closed, but I could see his chest rising and falling with reassuring regularity. Lena rushed to his bedside, running her fingers through his hair with infinite gentleness. Hey, baby, she whispered. Mommy's here. Jamie's eyes fluttered open, and even through the oxygen mask, I could see his face brighten. Mommy, I'm right here. You're okay. You're safe now. He looked past her and saw me standing near the door, and I saw confusion cross his small face, like he recognized me but couldn't quite place how. That's your grandma, Lena said softly, and there was something different in her voice. Something warm. Grandma Eleanor. She came as soon as she heard you were sick. She's been here with me the whole time, making sure you're okay. Jamie looked at me with those huge eyes, Mark's eyes, and gave me a tiny, tired smile. And just like that, my heart broke and healed simultaneously. I stayed the entire night, keeping vigil while Lena dozed fitfully in the chair beside Jamie's bed, ready to wake her if anything changed. Fetching coffee and water and anything else that might help. Just being there, being the person she'd needed me to be all along, if only she'd let me. Around 3 in the morning, when Jamie was sleeping peacefully and the worst had clearly passed, Lena looked up at me from her chair, her face pale in the harsh hospital light. Why are you being so kind to me? She asked quietly. After everything I've done keeping you away, shutting you out, why are you here? I pulled a chair close to hers and sat down, taking her hand again. Because you're family, I said simply. And because I love that little boy in that bed more than I can express. But also, I paused, choosing my words carefully. Because I think you've been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and tonight you finally let me help you carry it. That's all I ever wanted, Lena. Not to intrude or control or fix anything. Just to help carry some of the weight. She started crying again, but quietly this time. I've been so wrong about you. You've been protecting yourself, I said gently. And I understand that now. They discharged Jamie late the following afternoon with an armful of prescriptions. An inhaler, and detailed instructions for managing his newly diagnosed asthma. Mark had managed to get on the first flight back and arrived at the hospital disheveled and frantic, still in the clothes he'd worn to his conference. pulling both Lena and Jamie into his arms and crying with relief. He turned to me afterward, still teary, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom, thank you. Lena told me everything, that you stayed all night, that you were here when she needed someone. I don't know what to say except thank you." "There's nothing to say," I told him, squeezing his shoulder. "Where else would I be?" A week later, my phone rang. Lena's name appeared on the screen, and my heart jumped because she had never, not once in 4 years, called me directly. Every communication had been filtered through Mark, secondhand, carefully mediated. "Eleanor, do you have time to talk? I mean, in person?" We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes. Neutral ground. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee already ordered, her hands wrapped around one of them. Like she was trying to draw courage from its warmth. "I got you a cappuccino," she said as I sat down. "Mark mentioned once that's what you like." It was such a small thing, but it meant everything. It meant she'd been listening. It meant she'd remembered. It meant she cared enough to try. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us trying to figure out where to start. The cafe hummed with quiet conversation around us, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of cups against saucers. Finally, Lena spoke. "I owe you an apology." "Several, actually. Probably more than I can count." I started to protest, but she held up a hand. "Please, let me say this, because I've been rehearsing it for days, and if I don't get it out now, I never will." She took a shaky breath. "I've kept you at a distance since the day we met, and it wasn't fair, and it wasn't right, and I need to explain why, even though it doesn't excuse any of it." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, staring down into it like she might find the right words floating there. "I grew up in a family where boundaries didn't exist. My mother was invasive, controlling. She had opinions about everything I did, and she wasn't shy about sharing them. What I wore, what I studied, who I dated, how I decorated my apartment, what I ate, how I spent my money, nothing was off limits. She would show up unannounced, go through my things, rearrange my kitchen cabinets, criticize my choices. And she did it all under the guise of love, you know? I'm your mother, I'm just trying to help. I only want what's best for you." But it never felt like help. It felt like suffocation. It felt like I was never allowed to be my own person. I stayed quiet, letting her continue, beginning to understand so much that had been opaque before. "When I met Mark, I promised myself things would be different. I would set clear boundaries from the beginning. I would protect my space, my autonomy, my right to make my own choices without interference. I would build the kind of family I wanted, not the kind I'd escaped from. And when I met you..." She finally looked up at me, her eyes full of regret. "You were nothing like my mother. You were kind and respectful, and you never pushed. You waited for invitations. You asked before you came over. You respected every boundary I set, even the unreasonable ones. But I couldn't see that because I was so busy building walls to keep you out that I didn't notice you were never trying to breach them in the first place." Her voice broke. "You were just trying to love us. And I treated that love like it was a threat instead of a gift." Lena, the night Jamie got sick, when I was in that ambulance watching him struggle to breathe, I panicked. Completely panicked. And the first person I thought to call, the first person I trusted to be there, was you. Not my mother, who I knew would make it about her and tell me everything I'd done wrong. Not my sister, who would have fallen apart and needed me to comfort her. You, because some part of me has always known that you're safe. That you're steady. That you care about us without needing anything in return except to be allowed to care. And I've spent 4 years punishing you for that instead of appreciating it." Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor. I'm sorry I kept Jamie from you. I'm sorry I made you feel unwelcome in our lives. I'm sorry I wasted so much time being afraid of the wrong thing. I'm sorry I couldn't see that the kind of mother-in-law I was so desperate to avoid was nothing like the one I actually had." I reached across the table and took both of her hands in mine, holding them gently. "I forgive you," I said simply. "Completely. And I'm sorry too for not asking what you needed, for not trying harder to understand where you were coming from. For not being more patient when you were clearly struggling. We both made mistakes. But we're here now, and that's what matters. We have a chance to start again." She squeezed my hands, her grip desperate, grateful. "I want to start over. I want Jamie to know his grandmother really know you, not just receive packages from you. I want Sunday dinners and spontaneous phone calls and inside jokes and all the normal family things I was too scared to let happen. I want him to grow up with you in his life, not as a stranger who sends presents but as someone who's actually there. I'd like that, I said, my own tears starting to fall now. I'd like that more than I can tell you. No more walls, she whispered. No more walls, I agreed. Just honesty, and patience, and trying our best. And second chances, she added. And second chances, I echoed. We sat there for a long time after that, talking about everything we should have talked about years ago. She told me about her childhood, about the ways her mother's constant interference had shaped her into someone who valued control above almost everything else. I told her about my own mother-in-law, about the mistakes I'd made with her, about the ways I'd tried to do better with Lena without understanding what better actually meant for her. We talked about Jamie, about Mark, about the kind of family we wanted to build together going forward. And for the first time, I felt like I was actually part of that family instead of an outsider looking in through glass. 6 months later, I stood in Lena and Mark's kitchen, their kitchen, where I was now welcome anytime, teaching Jamie how to make chocolate chip cookies while Lena worked at the dining room table and Mark tinkered with something in the garage. Sunday afternoons had become our tradition, these easy gatherings where we coexisted without performance or pretense. More chocolate chips, Grandma, Jamie announced, dumping an enthusiastic handful into the bowl. That might be enough, buddy, I laughed, gently guiding his small hand away from the bag. We want some dough left for the actual cookies. But chocolate chips are the best part. He has a point, Lena called from the dining room, looking up from her laptop with a smile, a real smile, warm and unguarded. Are you corrupting my child with sugar, Eleanor? Absolutely, I said. It's a grandmother's prerogative. Good. He needs a little corrupting. He's too well behaved. Mark appeared in the doorway, grease on his hands and a satisfied expression on his face. Fixed the lawnmower. Also, I'm pretty sure Jamie's going to have a stomach ache later. Worth it, Jamie declared solemnly, sneaking another chocolate chip into his mouth. It wasn't perfect. We still had moments of miscommunication, times when old patterns would surface and we'd have to consciously choose new ones. But we were trying, honestly, openly trying, and that made all the difference. Later that evening, after Mark and Jamie had gone upstairs to start the bedtime routine, Lena and I stood side by side at the sink, washing the cookie sheets and talking about nothing in particular, the kind of comfortable, meandering conversation that happens between people who no longer have to carefully curate every word. Thank you, she said suddenly, her hands still in the soapy water. For not giving up on us. For being here even when I made it nearly impossible. I bumped her shoulder gently with mine. Thank you for letting me in. For being brave enough to lower the walls. I know that wasn't easy. She turned to look at me, and in her eyes I saw something I'd been hoping to see for 4 years: genuine affection. Trust. Family. It's the best thing I've ever done, she said softly. And standing there in that kitchen, with the sound of my grandson laughing upstairs and the warmth of family all around me, I understood something I hadn't before: that family isn't something you're born into or even married into. It's something you build, slowly and carefully, with honesty and forgiveness and the courage to keep trying even when it's hard. The walls between Lena and me hadn't come down in a day. They'd taken 4 years to build, and they'd take time to fully dismantle. But we were doing it together now, brick by brick, replacing them with bridges instead. And that was more than enough. That was everything.